Hello, everyone. Fallon and I are back for an interview on profiles and strengths. And we're going to talk today with Ellen, highlighting women who lead, making a difference in our communities. We'll let Fallon give Ellen's full bio before we take off on the interview. But just make sure to follow us during Women's History Month. We're going to have several short interviews on these wonderful women that are making a difference in our communities. So thank you, Ellen, for joining us.
Yes. Thank you so much again, Ellen, for your time. So I will do a short bio of Ellen, and then I'll let Ellen just kind of speak a little bit more about the work that she's doing in the community. So Ellen is the Assistant Vice President of Trafficking and Violence Prevention at Nebraska Children's and Families Foundation. She is passionate about advocating for public policy and systems response to prevent deeper system involvement for children and families. She recognizes that the inherent strengths and expertise of survivors in communities do actually drive change. And with that, Ellen, she holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in social work. So again, thank you for all the work that you're doing, Ellen, with the women in our communities, their families, and thank you for being here with us. So if you could just tell us, again, that was just a little snippet of the work you're doing, a high-level snippet of it. We would love to hear a bit more about the work that you're doing with those survivors.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here and included in this project. I'm really passionate about supporting women and uplifting women, so this is a great space to be a part of. So I think I fell into this work in the way that I think most people do. Maybe they start into a social work journey thinking that you'd be interested in I think a lot of social work profession is associated with mental health practice or clinical practice. I always knew I was interested in the court process and the system involved young people, being sure their voice was at the center of that process. And sort of early on in my social work education, was partnered with a mentor who was working here in Nebraska at the Attorney General's office as a victim advocate. And really with her mentorship and partnership, she sort of led me into that field and I sort of never looked back. I just really found my passion for folks who are touched by this system by really no fault of their own, by not really having any awareness of how that process works. I mean, I think that is the piece of the criminal justice process that most of us never interact with it, and that's a good thing. So really finding ways and avenues to demystify it and humanize it for people really became my motivation in my professional work. And so I spent several years at the Attorney General's office as a victim advocate and traveled across the state, really working directly with survivors of crime. So everyone from really young children to older folks that had been victimized in various ways and had survived their crimes, helping them testify in court, go through that process was really my life for a long time, doing that direct advocacy work. And then later, I found myself working in public education and serving folks who were experiencing homelessness and young people who were going through that, and also trying to get their education, trying to do what kids do every day and go to school and focus and learn, while also just really not knowing where they were going to sleep night to night. And that work was really sustained, honestly, by lots of other women in the social work department who I worked with that made me show up every day and helped me also work on my own self-care and work on how to manage my caseload and referrals and connecting folks with the right resources. But I was really still called to do the kind of criminal justice advocacy work and ended back at the Attorney General's office. There was an opportunity to coordinate a new team there that examined domestic violence fatality. So that was a huge undertaking, a huge project, and more macro than the work that I had done previously. But I felt like I was really ready for that change, that kind of break from that direct crisis work. And that's where I really felt I got to jump in with 2 feet, kind of backwards, upside down some days it felt, but that was really bringing groups together to look at these cases and examine them really closely in a way that our state hadn't done before. And then shortly after that, NCFF came knocking on my door, and it was an opportunity, I thought, really to continue that broader level system work, and focus more on working with young people. So 14 to about 24 is the group that we're trying to impact under an Office of Victims of Crime grant. So I manage that grant, and then also help the communities that we serve better respond to the folks that are experiencing violence in their community. So
Ellen's top 5 strengths, right? And if you, as you hear her story in the work she's doing, those top 5 strengths align so cleanly and nicely and really speak to what you're doing. So Ellen's top 5 strengths, the first one is futuristic. The second one is relator. Third one is ideation. Fourth one, developer. And fifth one, empathy. So it all aligns. It all aligns with the work that you're in.
So
I would say so, yeah.
Which are there one or several of those or a mix of those strengths that resonate the most with you and what you do every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that I kept coming back to when I was reading my profile and really thinking about this interview was the relator one. I think especially lately with the world that we live in now, and sort of working in this more system-focused work at this higher level, it just continues to become true for me that we just really only have each other. We really have our communities that we're from, our communities that we're called to, our communities that we want to be a part of. But in doing that, those relationships and the people that we become close with and the people that we trust and the people that we want in our inner circle are really, for me, what keeps me going and what keeps me motivated, and where I find joy, which I think is really important when you're doing this kind of work. So that one for me, I always joke that like I'm not the person that wants to know just casually what you're up to this weekend. I want to know all about you. I want to know what you like. I want to know what you don't like. I want to know about your childhood. I want to know what your dreams are. So I think just that connectedness to other people is really important to me and always has been. And it just very much rings true for me when I think about those strengths.
I love how you connected it to finding joy.
Yeah.
And sharing that joy with other people in a really tough role, right? In a tough world.
Yeah.
And I would add on to that is that you are building genuine relationships, right? Like the work that you're doing, those victims and the folks that's in it, they have to know that someone there is really there for them. And the best way to do that is you build trust. But that starts with just building those genuine relationships with folks. So kudos to you, Ellen. Kudos to you. Okay, Ellen. So here's the tough part here. We have more questions for you.
Okay.
Because we love hearing your answers.
Yes. So as we celebrate Women's History Month, you briefly touched on mentorship and that person that took you under their wing, so to speak. How do you foster developing women in your field under the premises of mentorship? Other folks and women that are coming down the pipeline, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I feel like I always will struggle with imposter syndrome until I'm 87 years old, and no matter how long I do the work that I do, because the idea of me as a mentor to others still feels like, what can I tell you that someone else who has known so much more than I do hasn't told you already? But I think I have been so fortunate to just be surrounded by women who always have offered me a seat at their table, who have always said, there is plenty of work to go around. The more voices that we have lifting up this work, the better. The more people that have passion and want to be sustainable and really can be strategic in elevating the voice of survivors, of really centering that as part of the work, really highlighting all of the inequities that are happening across our state, across the world. I think that has always been my approach because that's been what has been given to me, I guess. I think it's really just so important to me to always say, there's room at my table. There's room for you. Your voice is important. Your voice is unique to you. And everyone should hear that voice, no matter how small you might feel in this moment. That voice has a ripple, and that ripple is so important. So I think that has always been how I have felt about, especially in working with other women and wanting their voice to be heard just as much as I've been given that opportunity.
I hear a lot of empathy in that too. The ability to walk in other people's shoes and relate to them. That's a beautiful combination.
Yeah. So we recognize the achievements of women who have broken barriers, right? Like when we are in Women's History Month, we are talking about knocking down walls, kicking in doors, smashing windows, because we want to break those barriers. How do you envision using your strengths to continue breaking barriers and creating positive change for future generations of women leaders?
So this is a huge question. I mean, you could really, I can answer this in so many ways in world domination, but, you know, I think it just does go back to finding connections. I just think as small and simple as that sounds, there's always that common thread between folks. And if I really think of the fatality team in that way, I mean, that was a real experience to see people together with their guard down, with law enforcement, advocates, funder groups, prosecution, all these different people who never get to be vulnerable in the same space, sharing that room in a really intensive process and finding that common thread is so powerful. So I think any opportunity to build bridges between folks who normally would say that type of work doesn't impact my work, or that type of experience, I don't relate to that, so I don't understand my place in that. I think we all have a place in making our communities safer and more beautiful and more accepting. And I think that that's the overarching goal in everything. I mean, I think that my work is so focused on this violence prevention, dark place, but ultimately the other side of that can be really beautiful. And I think building those bridges between people to really understand those connections and why those connections are so important for the greater good is really the future that I hope to work toward. So
it's beautiful. Well, I've got the last question. In celebration of Women's History Month, which we're all very excited about, can you name for us a woman in the past that inspires you in the work you do today?
So I thought a long time about this question, and I always have a list of people that I think of. But the person that I always think of for questions like this and even opportunities like this is my grandmother. She never got to go to college. She worked really hard at the telephone company in Omaha, and then later worked at Omaha Home for Boys, and just was someone in my life that was the biggest cheerleader I ever had. I mean, I think of all the times that she encouraged me to go back to school. I went back to school later in life, and she was just so proud, so proud, and so even jealous in a way. I mean, she would say to me, if I could go back in time, all I would want to do is be on a campus, be in campus, go to a library, read all the books, do all the things. And so having an advanced degree and her not being able to see me get that is kind of heartbreaking, but also really powerful to think how she would have felt about that. And I think she was just so devoted to her community, to her family, and just so selfless in that way that she motivates me in her life and in her memory, just to do good, to find good and to be good. And yeah, so that's who I think about for Women's History Month.
What's your grandmother's name? We need to have
her name is Bernice Peterson. Yeah. And she always hated her name. She thought it was an awful name. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I told her I loved her name, and she said, "Don't do that to any other little baby in this name."
That's lovely.
But yeah, she was great. So
well, thank you for sharing that.
Yes, she would definitely be proud of you, Ellen. So don't think twice about that. You are doing phenomenal work and just keep at it. So yeah.
Thanks for all you do, Ellen. Thanks for taking the time for us and sharing inspiration with the other women out there. Let's go keep making history, right?
Right. Breaking down barriers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time.